David with the Head of Goliath, 1609 to 1610. Imagine stepping into a dimly lit room in Rome, where shadows seem thicker than air, and a single painting pulls you into its abyss. On the canvas, a young David grips the sword, his gaze heavy, not triumphant but sorrowful. In his hand, dangling like a grim trophy, is the severed head of Goliath. But here's the shocking truth: this is no ordinary biblical villain. That decapitated head is none other than Caravaggio himself. Why would a man paint his own likeness as a beheaded monster? The answer lies in Caravaggio's tortured life at the time. By 1609 he was a fugitive. He had killed a man during a duel in Rome years earlier. Hunted, exiled, moving from city to city, Malta, Naples, Sicily, he was haunted by guilt and paranoia. Rome had placed a bounty on his head. At any moment he could be killed. When he painted David with the Head of Goliath, he wasn't just retelling scripture. He was writing his own confession in oil and blood. Caravaggio had always been obsessed with realism. He dragged prostitutes, beggars, and criminals into his studio to use as models. But here the realism cuts deeper. He chose his own face for Goliath, drained of life, lips half open as if gasping for a final breath. The head is not grotesque fantasy, it's raw, human, fragile. Caravaggio saw himself as the villain, the sinner, the condemned man. The artistic process was as violent as his life. Caravaggio worked quickly, furiously, with little patience for careful sketches. He used chiaroscuro, the clash of darkness and blinding light, to heighten drama. David's face glows with a tragic calm, while the shadows engulf Goliath. Notice the sword, it bears an inscription, HSOS, an abbreviation for Humilitas Occidit Superbam, humility kills pride. Was Caravaggio begging for mercy? Was this painting meant as a gift for the Pope, a desperate plea for pardon? Many scholars believe so. The social backdrop makes the painting even more chilling. Europe was a place of brutality, public executions, wars, plagues. The church demanded art that inspired awe and fear. Caravaggio gave them something more dangerous: art that blurred the line between holiness and crime, between sacred redemption and human guilt. David with the Head of Goliath wasn't just biblical drama, it was Caravaggio putting his soul on trial. Symbolism bleeds from every detail. David isn't shown as the victorious, jubilant hero. His expression is one of pity, almost mourning. He looks at the severed head with sorrow, as though he understands that triumph and tragedy are inseparable. This is not a boy celebrating victory, it is a man contemplating mortality. Caravaggio's choice is deliberate. He paints David not as executioner, but as witness to human fragility. And then, there's the terrifying intimacy of the self-portrait. To paint your own decapitated head is more than symbolism. It's confession. It's prophecy. It's punishment. Some say Caravaggio intended this as his personal act of penance, offering his head to Rome before Rome could take it. Others believe it reflects his obsession with death, which stalked him until the very end. When the painting was first seen, it was unlike anything Europe had witnessed. Too raw, too personal, too brutal. This wasn't the polished triumphs of Renaissance masters. This was the bleeding reality of a man who lived and painted on the edge of damnation. Over time, David with the Head of Goliath became one of the most haunting self-portraits in history, a vision of guilt, mortality, and desperate hope for forgiveness. Caravaggio himself would die shortly after, at just 38, under mysterious circumstances. Some say fever, others murder. But in this painting he had already written his epitaph. A man decapitated not by another's hand, but by his own guilt, his own darkness. Stand before this canvas today and you feel it, not triumph but tragedy. Not victory but confession. Caravaggio whispers through the shadows, I am both the sinner and the saint, both David and Goliath, both the hand that kills and the head that falls. And as the silence of the gallery wraps around you, you realize, the most terrifying part of the painting is not the severed head itself, but the haunting truth it reveals. Caravaggio painted his own damnation, and in doing so painted ours. Judith Beheading Holofernes, 1598 to 1599. The room is drenched in silence. Then a scream cuts through it, the scream of a dying man. On Caravaggio's canvas, that scream is eternal. Judith, the biblical widow, leans forward with a blade pressed deep into the neck of Holofernes, the Assyrian general. Her face is pale, detached, almost cold. To her side, an old woman watches, wrinkled hands clutching a sack, waiting to collect the severed head. Blood sprays across the bed in an arc of crimson. This is not a heroic tale, it is execution captured in oil. But here's the unsettling truth. Caravaggio painted this moment with such savage immediacy because he knew violence intimately. By 1598, he was a young painter clawing his way into Rome's ruthless art world. He lived among gamblers, prostitutes, and swordsmen. Street fights were common, duels deadly. Judith's blade wasn't just biblical, it was the same steel that flashed in the streets Caravaggio wandered at night. The story of Judith was well known, a widow who seduced the enemy general only to decapitate him and save her people. Artists before Caravaggio had painted it, but they softened the violence, making it noble, almost sanitized. Caravaggio did the opposite. He brought us into the exact moment of death, the struggle, the blood, the sheer horror of flesh giving way under steel. When he painted Judith Beheading Holofernes, Caravaggio was obsessed with truth. He refused to idealize. He dragged models off the streets into his studio. For Judith, he used a young courtesan rumored to be his lover. For the old servant, he chose a withered woman from the markets, her skin sagging, her expression sharp with cruelty. And Holofernes, his face contorted in agony, is painted as if Caravaggio had watched a real man die. Some believe he had. His technique was revolutionary. The entire painting explodes with chiaroscuro, the violent clash of light and shadow. A spotlight seems to fall on Judith and her victim, leaving the edges of the canvas swallowed in blackness. This darkness isn't background, it's suffocation. It traps the figures, forcing us to witness the horror with no escape. Look at Judith's expression. It's not triumph, not fury. It's hesitation. Her arms are outstretched, but her body leans back, recoiling from the violence she herself inflicts. Caravaggio masterfully shows the psychological complexity. Judith is both executioner and victim of her own act. She is saving her people, but she is scarred forever. The symbolism is chilling. Holofernes is not just an enemy general. He is male power undone by female cunning. Judith, a widow, embodies both vulnerability and vengeance. The old servant, clutching the sack, is the inevitability of death itself, waiting to consume the fallen. And the spray of blood, painted with shocking realism, reminds us that violence is never clean, never glorious. The historical backdrop makes the work even more explosive. Rome was ruled by the Counter-Reformation. The Catholic Church wanted art that shocked, art that terrified sinners back into obedience. Caravaggio gave them exactly that, but at a price. His work was so raw, so disturbingly human, it divided audiences. Some saw divine power. Others saw blasphemy. When Judith Beheading Holofernes was unveiled, it was met with awe and disgust. Patrons were both fascinated and horrified by Caravaggio's refusal to turn away from the brutality. For some, it was too much blood, too much intimacy with death. But for others it was genius, a mirror of the world's cruelty. And here's where the story twists back to Caravaggio himself. Years later he would kill a man in Rome. He would flee hunted, painting in exile. Many have looked back at Judith and seen prophecy. It was as if Caravaggio had painted not just biblical violence, but his own fate, the blade, the blood, the sudden end. Standing before the painting today you feel its silence. Judith's eyes avoid yours. The old servant waits. Holofernes screams forever. And Caravaggio whispers from the canvas, "This is what death looks like, this is what murder feels like, this is what it means to hold a life in your hands." It's more than a painting. It's a crime scene frozen in time. A moment where morality, justice, and horror collapse into one. And as you walk away, that spray of crimson lingers in your mind, because Caravaggio has forced you to see what others look away from, the raw, unflinching truth that beauty and horror often share the same canvas. The Incredulity of Saint Thomas, 1601–1602. A man bends forward, his brow furrowed, his hand trembling as he presses his finger into the open wound of another man's chest. The scene is intimate, invasive, almost unbearable to watch. The wound gapes, raw and red, yet the figure who bears it stands calm, steady, allowing the intrusion. This is the Incredulity of Saint Thomas, and on the canvas, Caravaggio has captured not just a biblical moment, but the very essence of doubt and faith colliding in human flesh. The Gospel tells it simply. After Christ's resurrection, Thomas refused to believe. He demanded proof. He wanted to touch the wounds before he would call Jesus his Lord. Centuries of painters had depicted the event, but they softened it. They bathed it in symbolism, made it spiritual, distant, serene. Not Caravaggio. For him, the divine had to bleed, the sacred had to feel the press of human fingers. When Caravaggio painted this masterpiece around 1601–1602, he was no stranger to doubt himself. Rome buzzed with tension. He was at the height of his fame, yet constantly under threat. His violent temper, his street brawls, his reckless pride were carving a dangerous path. In a city where faith was supposed to be unshakable, Caravaggio's paintings revealed faith not as certainty, but as struggle, as touch, as a visceral confrontation with the unknown. Look closely at the canvas. Christ does not glow with heavenly light. He is a man, flesh and bone, his body strong but scarred. Caravaggio paints him not like a distant god, but like a wounded soldier standing among his brothers. Thomas, with wide eyes and furrowed brow, leans in with desperation, his finger pushing into the open wound with an almost surgical directness. The other apostles cluster close, their foreheads nearly touching, their faces lit by the harsh spotlight of Caravaggio's chiaroscuro. The spotlight is everything. The background is swallowed in blackness, forcing us into the claustrophobic space of the moment. There is no church, no symbol, no heavenly choir. Just four men, a wound, and the tension between doubt and belief. The silence of that darkness is deafening. It is the silence of centuries of questioning, of humanity staring into the abyss and begging for proof. Caravaggio's obsession was reality. He took ordinary men from the streets of Rome, peasants, beggars, workers, and made them saints, apostles, witnesses to eternity. Thomas is not idealized. His face is weathered, his nails are dirty, his hand coarse from labor. He looks like a man who has struggled, sweated, doubted his entire life. And when he touches the wound, it is not symbolic, it is tactile, invasive, physical. You can almost feel the resistance of skin breaking under pressure. But Caravaggio gives us more than just anatomy. The composition itself tells a story. Look at Christ's hand, he doesn't resist, he doesn't recoil. He gently takes Thomas's wrist and guides it into the wound as if saying, "Here, touch, see, believe." It is a shocking intimacy, a surrender of the divine body to human doubt. In the context of the Counter-Reformation, this was dangerous art. The Catholic Church demanded images that reinforced faith, but Caravaggio went further. He gave believers the unsettling truth that faith begins with doubt. To see Christ as wounded flesh, to probe that wound, was a bold defiance of the sanitized, triumphant images of the past. Critics were horrified by the vulgar realism, but worshippers were transfixed. Here was faith not in heaven but in blood. Symbolism runs deep in the scene. The wound itself is more than proof, it is the doorway between doubt and salvation. The darkness surrounding the figures represents the void of unbelief, pierced only by the light of revelation. The huddled apostles symbolize humanity leaning in, desperate for certainty, each of us Thomas in that moment of hesitation and awe. Reception of the painting was divided. Some saw blasphemy, a Christ too human, too vulnerable, reduced to flesh instead of exalted as God. Others saw genius. For the ordinary faithful, it was electrifying. At last, a Christ who could be touched, a faith that acknowledged doubt instead of ignoring it. Over time, the painting became one of Caravaggio's most celebrated works, precisely because it refuses to comfort. It demands that you confront your own unbelief. And perhaps that is why it still haunts us. Because in Thomas's eyes, we see ourselves, the yearning for proof, the terror of being wrong, the desperate need to touch what cannot be seen. In Christ's calm acceptance, we see the answer, that faith is not the absence of doubt, but the courage to look into the wound and believe anyway. Today, when you stand before the incredulity of Saint Thomas, you cannot escape the feeling of intrusion. You are too close. The wound is too real. You are pulled into that circle of faces, forced to ask yourself the same question Thomas asked. What would it take for me to believe? And as you leave the canvas behind, the image follows you into the silence. Four men locked forever in a circle of doubt and revelation. A wound that bleeds across centuries. And Caravaggio himself, whispering through the shadows. Faith is never easy, it is always flesh, always doubt, always a wound you cannot ignore. The taking of Christ. A kiss. One of the most intimate gestures in human history, transformed into the ultimate act of betrayal. Judas leans forward, his lips brushing against Christ's cheek, while armored soldiers close in like vultures. The lantern glows, casting sharp light over metal and fear, and in that instant the fate of Jesus is sealed. This is Caravaggio's The Taking of Christ, a painting where tenderness collides with treachery, where light reveals not salvation but cruelty. Painted in 1602 for the Roman nobleman Ciriaco Mattei, the work was born in a moment when Caravaggio himself was both adored and feared in the city. His fame was unmatched, his technique revolutionary, yet his life spiraled ever closer to ruin. He had brawled in taverns, killed a man over a gambling debt, and was already marked by a reputation for violence. How fitting then that Caravaggio poured his own fractured soul into this depiction of betrayal, a scene where love is poisoned by deceit. The act of creation was driven by both artistic ambition and personal obsession. Caravaggio did not approach the story as a distant biblical allegory. For him, the Garden of Gethsemane was not some mystical, otherworldly place. It was Rome itself, dark alleys lit by flickering lanterns, where danger lurked at every corner. He painted with the urgency of a man who knew betrayal intimately, as if Judas's kiss echoed from his own life of shifting loyalties and hidden enemies. The composition of the taking of Christ is masterful in its tension. The figures are locked in a compressed space, pressed together so tightly that the canvas feels suffocated, mirroring the claustrophobia of the moment. Jesus, robed in deep black and crimson, bows his head in quiet resignation, his hands clasped together not in resistance but in surrender. Judas, his face coarse and desperate, presses close, clutching Christ's shoulders as though trying to justify the kiss even as he delivers the fatal signal. Around them, armored soldiers surge forward, their polished steel catching the harsh glint of the lantern, turning the scene into a clash of flesh and metal, spirit and brutality. And then there is the lantern-bearer. Look closely, it is none other than Caravaggio himself, hidden in the shadows, holding the source of light. He casts illumination on the treachery, yet he stands apart, an outsider, a witness. Some interpret this as confession, Caravaggio revealing his own complicity, his own fascination with violence and betrayal. Others see it as defiance, the artist proclaiming his power to expose truth through the brush, even if it meant exposing his own darkness. The historical and religious context deepens the weight of this work. Painted at the dawn of the Counter-Reformation, the Catholic Church demanded images that stirred not intellect but emotion, paintings that could pierce the heart. Caravaggio delivered with terrifying intensity. For the faithful of his time, this was no sanitized depiction of Christ's arrest. It was immediate, brutal, and human. It invited viewers not to contemplate from afar but to feel the suffocating dread of betrayal as though they were standing in that garden themselves. The symbolism is layered and haunting. The kiss of Judas is more than treachery, it is the eternal paradox of love turned weapon, intimacy corrupted into destruction. The lantern Caravaggio holds may represent artificial light, human attempts to reveal truth, contrasted with the divine light radiating from Christ's silent endurance. Notice too how Christ's hands are bound in calm submission. He does not fight, his strength lies in acceptance. It is a silent rebuke to the violence crashing around him, and perhaps a bitter mirror to Caravaggio's own life, where acceptance was nearly impossible and rebellion inevitable. The reception of the taking of Christ was one of awe, though its fate was as troubled as the man who painted it. For centuries, the painting was lost, misattributed, hidden in obscurity, as if the betrayal it depicted cursed the canvas itself. Only in the 20th century was it rediscovered in a Jesuit dining hall in Dublin, a treasure cloaked in anonymity until scholars revealed its true origin. Its reappearance was hailed as nothing short of miraculous, a resurrection worthy of the biblical story it captured. Stand before it today and you feel more than history, you feel the raw nerves of humanity itself. The clang of metal, the rough grasp of soldiers, the hush of resignation, and the cold kiss of betrayal, it all unfolds not as a story from the past, but as a timeless truth about the human heart. Caravaggio forces us to ask, where do we stand in this scene? Are we Christ, enduring betrayal with dignity? Are we Judas, betraying with a kiss? Or are we Caravaggio himself, lantern in hand, doomed to witness the darkness yet powerless to change it? And when you turn away, the question lingers, haunting as the echo of that kiss in the shadows. Narcissus. He bends over the dark water, his face inches from the surface, his breath trembling against it. The boy sees beauty staring back, a flawless image, radiant, divine. He does not know it is his own reflection. He does not know he is condemned. This is Caravaggio's Narcissus, painted around 1597 to 1599, a haunting vision where myth and reality dissolve into one another, where desire becomes a prison. Unlike his biblical and religious masterpieces, Narcissus plunges into the pagan world of Ovid's Metamorphoses. Yet the story was no distant myth to Caravaggio. In Rome, surrounded by power, vanity, and a society obsessed with appearances, the legend of a youth destroyed by his own reflection carried brutal resonance. And for Caravaggio himself, an artist accused of arrogance, rebellion, and self-destructive pride, the myth was more than a subject. Was a mirror. The painting was created in Caravaggio's early Roman years, when his reputation was growing but his life already tangled in scandal. He had risen from obscurity, from poverty and exile, and was now the enfant terrible of the Roman art world, celebrated for his brilliance, whispered about for his violence. Some saw him as a genius, others as a danger to society. In Narcissus, it is as though Caravaggio confronted that contradiction head-on, painting not merely a myth but a warning to himself. The composition is striking in its simplicity. There is no garden, no landscape, no background at all. Only darkness, pure and engulfing, swallowing the canvas like a void. Into that void Caravaggio thrusts a single figure, Narcissus, doubled by the water. The boy kneels at the pool's edge, his elbows bent, his hands reaching into the reflection. His face, illuminated by Caravaggio's dramatic chiaroscuro, is serene yet tense, his gaze locked with his own likeness. The reflection mirrors him perfectly, but in shadow, in distortion. One body of flesh, the other of trembling illusion. The choice to strip away every distraction intensifies the scene's claustrophobia. The boy is trapped, not by chains, not by walls, but by his own gaze. There is nowhere to turn, nowhere to look except into himself. The canvas becomes a prison cell and Narcissus its inmate. Caravaggio's technique heightens this psychological tension. He uses deep blacks and earthy tones, forcing the viewer's eye to cling to the glowing flesh of Narcissus's face and hands. The reflection is painted with subtle distortion, the ripples of the water captured in blurred brushstrokes that make the boy's beauty look both alluring and ghostly. The light, as always with Caravaggio, is merciless. It does not caress but exposes, cutting through the darkness like fate itself. The symbolism of the painting reaches far beyond the myth. On one level, it is the story Ovid told. A boy cursed to fall in love with his reflection, doomed to waste away until he became a flower, a Narcissus. But on another, Caravaggio seems to transform Narcissus into a universal image of human obsession. It is the story of vanity, of desire turned inward, of self-love that corrodes instead of uplifts. Some have even suggested that Caravaggio, often accused of painting only himself, saw Narcissus as a reflection of his own artistic compulsion, to look into the mirror of reality, to paint it, to be consumed by it. The historical context is equally important. Rome at the time was a city of masks and performances, a place where social appearances dictated survival. Patrons demanded flattery, and the powerful demanded obedience. To paint Narcissus in this environment was a dangerous act of subtle criticism. Caravaggio was holding up a mirror not only to a myth but to the very society that surrounded him. A culture obsessed with beauty, appearances, and vanity, blind to the decay beneath. The reception of Narcissus was complex. Unlike his religious paintings, which struck like thunder, Narcissus was more private, more allegorical. Some patrons admired its stark intensity, others dismissed it as unsettling. Over the centuries, it has been reinterpreted again and again, not just as a mythological subject, but as a psychological drama centuries ahead of its time. Today, it is seen as one of the first true explorations of obsession and identity in Western art, a precursor to the psychological intensity of modern painting. But the most haunting aspect of Narcissus lies in its timelessness. Who among us has not been caught by our own reflection, not merely in a mirror but in the endless reflections of modern life? Our images captured in photographs, screens, profiles, like Narcissus we gaze, we compare, we desire. Caravaggio's boy is not just an ancient myth. He is us, endlessly searching for ourselves in illusions. And so the painting ends not with myth, but with silence. The boy's fingers graze the water, his lips almost touch, his eyes never break away. He will not look up. He cannot. In Caravaggio's dark world, Narcissus does not bloom into a flower. He withers in endless longing, consumed by the very beauty he cannot possess. The pool remains still. The darkness closes in. And the reflection, like a ghost, waits for him forever.